The Sith Eternal, a shadowy and secretive faction, remained one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries for centuries. While the Sith, as a general concept, have long been synonymous with tyranny, darkness, and the pursuit of power, the Sith Eternal represented an evolution of the Sith ideology, one that existed not solely for conquest, but for the creation of an enduring permanent order in the galaxy. Their origins were not bound by time or place, as the Sith Eternal understood that power, particularly the kind that endures, requires careful planning, careful cultivation, and most importantly, patience. Unlike other factions of Sith, whose brief reigns came and went with each new Sith Lord or Emperor, the Sith Eternal sought to outlast them all, creating a future where the dark side of the Force would always remain a pivotal force within the galaxy. The story of the Sith Eternal is one not just about political manipulation, but of an intergenerational effort to control the galaxy by controlling the Force itself. The Sith Eternal operated in the background for millennia, appearing to be simply a collection of ancient Sith cults and fragmented factions, quietly pushing their own agenda, influencing leaders, and laying the groundwork for their ultimate goal, the enduring survival of the Sith Order. However, the more we examine their actions, the more it becomes clear that their influence reached far beyond mere survival. Their goal was not just to see the Sith return to power, but to reshape the very fabric of the galaxy, ensuring that the Sith would never be extinguished again, no matter how many times they seemed to fall. Through careful manipulation, they orchestrated a grand design to create a new Sith Order that would transcend the boundaries of time and space, a plan that would ultimately shape the galaxy's future in ways no one could predict. What truly makes the Sith Eternal unique, however, is their connection to Palpatine, the Galactic Emperor. Palpatine's role as the leader of the Galactic Empire has been well documented, and his actions were certainly the product of a deeply ingrained Sith philosophy. Yet Palpatine's return was not his doing alone. It was the Sith Eternal who had been the true architects behind his rise to power. Through their interventions, they ensured that the Sith would be resurrected time and time again, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Palpatine was but a puppet to their greater plan, a vehicle for their vision, someone who would carry the Sith legacy through the Empire's rise and eventual fall. What few understood was that Palpatine's return, which was seemingly brought about by his dark side mastery, was in fact the culmination of the Sith Eternal's long-standing efforts. This culminated in the formation of the Final Order, a dark and secretive arm of the Sith Eternal that would eventually reveal itself in the form of the Sith fleet on Exegol, a powerful force that would serve as the last stronghold of Sith power for millennia. But who were the Sith Eternal, and what did they truly want? The answer lies not in their individual actions, but in the greater philosophy that underpinned their existence. The Sith Eternal were not simply a group of power-hungry individuals, nor were they a secret society that sought to impose tyranny over the galaxy. They were something far more complex. An organization that sought to maintain the balance of the Force, at least in their minds. While the Jedi Order sought to preserve peace and harmony, the Sith Eternal believed that the dark side was an essential force in the galaxy's evolution. Unlike the Sith Lords of the past, who sought personal power and dominion, the Sith Eternal saw the dark side as a tool for shaping the future of the galaxy, and for ensuring that no one faction, not even the Jedi, would ever hold absolute control. Their vision was one of a galactic balance, where light and dark forces would perpetually struggle, ensuring that change would always be present in the galaxy. They understood that the galaxy could not remain in a state of stasis, and that conflict, the type of chaos that the Sith thrived in, was the only way for the galaxy to grow and evolve. The Sith Eternal understood that, for their vision to take hold, they would need to bide their time, operate in secret, and influence the galaxy from the shadows. They became master manipulators, using Force-sensitive individuals as pawns in their greater scheme. It wasn't enough for them to simply manipulate galactic leaders like Palpatine. The Sith Eternal aimed to control the very foundations of the galactic institutions themselves. They were involved in every corner of the galaxy's infrastructure, from governmental systems to military organizations, ensuring that their influence would be felt no matter where the galaxy went. Central to their plan was the understanding that time itself was their ally. The Sith Eternal saw that the galaxy's need for control and order would eventually drive it back to the dark side. They weren't in a rush to dominate, but they were committed to ensuring that the Sith would always be present, waiting for the right moment to strike. Their manipulations were often masked in strategic alliances and subtle changes to the political and economic systems of the galaxy, ensuring that when the time came for the Sith to rise again, the galaxy would be ready to accept them. The emergence of the Empire was part of their plan, but even Palpatine's reign was a means to an end, and they anticipated that one day the Empire would fall. When it did, they would be ready to rebuild it in a way that would ensure lasting Sith power. The Sith Eternal were not just seeking the restoration of an empire, they were building a new future for the galaxy, one that would ultimately be shaped by their influence. While many may think of the Sith as destructive and chaotic, the Sith Eternal viewed their actions as a form of enlightenment. They believed that the galaxy, in its current state, was stagnating under the weight of Jedi ideology, an ideology that suppressed the dark side in favor of an impossible ideal of peace. The Jedi, in their minds, had failed to understand the nature of the Force, that balance came through both light and dark, and that both sides were necessary for the galaxy's survival. The Sith Eternal didn't just want power for power's sake, they wanted to bring about a new order, one where the dark side was allowed to flourish alongside the light, ensuring that no force could ever dominate the other completely. At the heart of the Sith Eternal's vision was a new form of leadership, one that would transcend the old Sith structures. The Sith Eternal's ultimate goal was not to simply have one Sith leader, like Palpatine, at the top of the galaxy's hierarchy. Instead, they wanted to spread the power of the Sith across the galaxy, ensuring that every aspect of the galactic order was touched by the dark side. This vision led to their creation of the Sith fleet, hidden away on Exegol, waiting for the right moment to reassert Sith control over the galaxy. However, their plans were far more than just military. They sought to influence the very cultural and philosophical ideas of the galaxy. They knew that, in order for their legacy to endure, the galaxy's very perception of the Force would need to change. The Sith Eternal aimed to reshape society, to ensure that the galaxy would forever remember the lessons of the dark side, making it an inextricable part of the galaxy's evolution. They were preparing for a future in which the Sith were the natural rulers, not just of the galaxy, but of its very philosophical future. This new order was not just about power. It was about ensuring the survival of the Sith for millennia to come. The Sith Eternal's long-term strategy was one where the Sith would never be completely destroyed, no matter how many times they fell or were hidden away in secret corners of the galaxy. They were eternal in the truest sense. Their influence would never cease, and they would always return when the galaxy needed them the most. Their role in the galaxy's future, therefore, would be one of constant evolution and subtle guidance. The Sith Eternal would be the unseen hand that steered the galaxy toward a future where darkness and light coexisted in a delicate, ever-changing balance. The Sith Eternal's influence was not limited to political intrigue or military might. Their grand vision for the future of the galaxy was rooted in a philosophical revolution that would reshape how the galaxy viewed the Force and its duality. Historically, the Jedi had preached an ideal of balance that dismissed the dark side as something to be controlled, suppressed, and even eradicated. This ideology created a skewed view of the Force, where the light side was seen as pure and virtuous, while the dark side was relegated to the role of the corrupt, chaotic, and evil force. The Sith Eternal recognized this fundamental flaw in the way the galaxy perceived the Force. Rather than simply working to eradicate the Jedi, they sought to reshape the way the galaxy understood balance itself. The Sith Eternal's philosophy was rooted in the belief that balance in the Force was not about the complete dominance of the light side, but rather the coexistence of light and dark, each playing an essential role in the galaxy's ongoing evolution. By shaping the galaxy's understanding of balance, the Sith Eternal's influence extended far beyond just their hidden sect or Palpatine's empire. They worked to make the dark side an intrinsic part of galactic culture, ensuring that the Jedi Order's ideals were not the only narrative. They understood that for the Sith to remain an eternal force in the galaxy, they had to become an inextricable and essential part of the galaxy's philosophical framework. The Sith Eternal worked through subliminal manipulation, seeding ideas in the political structures, cultural institutions, and philosophical doctrines of the galaxy. They understood that power could not be maintained through brute force alone. Instead, the Sith Eternal sought to make the dark side a foundational element of how the galaxy would view the Force, ensuring that their legacy could survive through thought and belief, not just through military or political victories. The Sith Eternal's most significant success in this philosophical reimagining came with their efforts to manipulate the perception of the dark side within the Jedi Order itself. While the Jedi were often seen as the guardians of peace and justice, the Sith Eternal recognized that the Jedi's failure to acknowledge the dark side only gave it more power. The Jedi's refusal to accept the existence of the dark side as a necessary force created a dangerous imbalance in their worldview. The Sith Eternal's goal was to introduce the dark side as not merely a tool for destruction, but as a force of creation, one that could be used to reshape society and push it towards a more dynamic and evolving future. They believed that true balance came not from suppressing one side, but from embracing both. To achieve this, they needed to transform the galaxy's view of the Force from the Jedi's binary understanding to one that was more nuanced and flexible. The Sith Eternal were also keenly aware of the Jedi's vulnerability, their strict adherence to dogma, and their over-reliance on tradition. While the Sith were often viewed as chaotic and destructive, the Sith Eternal saw this as a strategic advantage. They recognized that the Jedi Order, with its rigid structure, would be vulnerable to evolution, while the dark side was always in a state of flux, constantly adapting and evolving to meet the needs of the galaxy. The Sith Eternal, in essence, were the guardians of change, ensuring that the galactic balance was never stagnant, that the galaxy would never fall into the complacency that the Jedi often embodied. They understood that growth required conflict, and that tension between the light and dark sides was necessary for progress. The manipulation of public perception was one of the Sith Eternal's key strategies. Rather than merely fighting the Jedi and the Galactic Republic, they worked in the shadows, subtly steering the course of galactic events. They understood that real power came from shaping minds, not just taking control of governments. The Sith Eternal planted their ideas in the minds of key figures, ensuring that even those who opposed them were unknowingly participating in their grand plan. For instance, Palpatine's rise to power was not an accident. It was part of the Sith Eternal's long game, a calculated effort to ensure that the Republic would be led by a figure who could manipulate not only the political structure, but also the philosophical framework of the galaxy. Under Palpatine's reign, the Jedi Order was manipulated, undermined, and eventually destroyed, paving the way for the Sith Eternal's vision of a new order, one that would not simply be a repeat of past Sith empires, but would be an evolutionary model where the dark side would be woven into the fabric of galactic life itself. One of the most insidious aspects of the Sith Eternal's influence was their ability to control the narrative of the galaxy's history. Through their manipulation of the holonet, the Jedi archives, and even the memories of the Force-sensitive population, they rewrote the story of the Force itself. The Sith Eternal sought to ensure that future generations would see the Sith not as enemies of peace, but as the necessary balance that had to exist for the galaxy's evolution. Their long-term vision was one in which the Sith were the natural rulers of the galaxy, and the Jedi were seen as relics of a bygone era, their ideas of peace and balance irrelevant in the face of an evolving galaxy. With the Sith Eternal's resurrection of Palpatine and the final formation of the Final Order, they demonstrated their full control over the galaxy's destiny. Exegol, hidden in the unknown regions, served as the last bastion of the Sith, a final stronghold that would ensure the galaxy would never forget the legacy of the dark side. This hidden fleet was not just about power. It was a symbol. It represented the eternity of the Sith, who would rise again and again until their vision of the galaxy was realized. The Sith Eternal's influence was not just about fighting battles. It was about shaping history, rewriting the story of the Force in a way that would ensure the Sith would always have a place in the galaxy. As we look ahead to the future of the galaxy, the Sith Eternal's legacy will undoubtedly continue to influence the balance of the Force. Their ability to manipulate perception, control political institutions, and influence the direction of the galaxy through subtlety and patience ensures that their vision of the galactic future will never fully fade. The Sith Eternal may have been hidden in the shadows, but their influence will continue to echo through the galaxy's history, shaping the way future generations perceive the Force and their place within it. The Sith Eternal were not a faction that relied on brute force to make their mark on the galaxy. Unlike the Empire or the new Sith Order, whose tactics were focused on direct conflict, the Sith Eternal understood that the true path to lasting influence required a more subtle approach, one that would involve influencing the galaxy's leaders, institutions, and systems of power from the shadows. They recognized that in order to secure a future where the Sith would dominate, they had to embed themselves deeply within the galactic infrastructure, making sure that the Sith philosophy would be part of the galaxy's natural order. This meant influencing not just the Empire or the military, but the very foundations of governance, culture, and society itself. The Sith Eternal's network stretched far and wide, extending its tendrils into every corner of the galaxy. They understood that true power lay not in direct confrontation, but in the ability to manipulate the perceptions and decisions of key individuals and groups. Their greatest triumphs were often achieved in secret, where they could control events and outcomes without the galaxy ever knowing who was truly behind them. The final rise of Palpatine as Emperor was the culmination of the Sith Eternal's quiet work, but it wasn't the end of their plan. Rather, it was the beginning of a new chapter in their long game, one in which the dark side would be reintroduced into galactic politics under a new guise, where the Sith Eternal would be the shadow controllers of a galaxy on the brink of transformation. For decades, the Sith Eternal worked quietly within the Galactic Senate, carefully planting seeds of distrust and division among its members. Their ultimate goal was to weaken the Republic's structure from within, creating instability that would eventually force the galaxy to turn to a strong leader, someone who could impose order. And that leader was, of course, Palpatine. The Sith Eternal were masters of political manipulation, able to guide individuals to positions of power through a variety of means, from bribes to coercion and persuasion. By creating a network of loyalists within the Senate, military, and corporate sectors, they ensured that the Republic's collapse was inevitable. The ultimate creation of the Empire was not a result of Palpatine's personal ambitions alone, but the culmination of a series of carefully orchestrated events that had been years in the making, all guided by the Sith Eternal's hidden hand. While the Jedi Order fought the Republic's battles in the open, the Sith Eternal operated from the shadows, manipulating the actions of those who were unaware of their existence. They didn't need to engage in battle to win, they only needed to influence the right people at the right time. Their long-term strategy was to ensure that when the moment came, the galaxy would be ready to accept the return of the Sith, and that Palpatine would be the perfect leader to usher in their vision of a new Sith era. They understood that in order for the dark side to survive, it had to evolve, blending seamlessly with the political structures of the galaxy. Their plan was not to create a new Sith Empire, but to reshape the galaxy's institutions to the point where Sith philosophy would no longer be seen as a rebel ideology, but as an integral part of the galactic system. As Palpatine consolidated power, the Sith Eternal's presence was felt in the secret chambers of the Senate and in the hidden archives of the Jedi Order. They understood that the Jedi were the last true obstacle to their vision, and so they took great care to undermine the Jedi Order in subtle ways. The Sith Eternal did not engage in overt confrontation with the Jedi, as their goal was not to destroy the Order, but to weaken it. They understood that the Jedi's belief in the moral superiority of the light side was ultimately their greatest vulnerability. By casting the Jedi as outdated and out of touch with the realities of galactic politics, the Sith Eternal hoped to shift the narrative and ensure that the Jedi would be discredited in the eyes of the people. In this way, the Sith philosophy could begin to take root in the minds of the galaxy's citizens, setting the stage for the Sith Eternal's true rise to power. The Sith Eternal's manipulation of Palpatine was also a carefully executed affair. While Palpatine was undoubtedly a Sith Lord, he was also a pawn in their greater scheme, a figurehead who could lead the galaxy, but one whose true power would come not from his own ambitions, but from the Sith Eternal's guidance. Palpatine, in many ways, was the public face of the Sith Eternal's long-term plan, a figurehead who could rally the galaxy to their cause without ever realizing that he was merely playing a part in a grander design. The Sith Eternal's strategic use of Palpatine ensured that his reign would be sustained and expanded, as he was carefully manipulated into creating a galaxy-wide empire that would serve their purposes. His actions, the subjugation of the Jedi, the creation of the Galactic Empire, and his totalitarian rule were all in line with the Sith Eternal's vision, even if Palpatine himself could not see the full extent of his role in their plan. The culmination of the Sith Eternal's work, however, was not just about establishing Sith control over the galaxy. Their true masterstroke was to create a new type of Sith leadership, one that could survive the inevitable rise of future heroes and champions of the light. In the end, the Sith Eternals sought to create a system where the Sith ideology could never be eradicated. By embedding themselves in the galactic infrastructure and reworking the very framework of society, the Sith Eternal ensured that their vision of the galaxy would endure, even after Palpatine's death. The creation of the Sith fleet on Exegol was the final step in this plan, a secret, hidden fortress where the Sith could be resurrected and continue their influence on the galaxy long after Palpatine's fall. The Sith Eternal's plan, however, was never just about maintaining Sith dominance. It was about transforming the galaxy itself through their masterful manipulation of galactic history. Their goal was to reshape the future of the galaxy's perception of the Force, the Sith, and the Jedi. They understood that the dark side was not just a tool of destruction, but a necessary force for the galaxy's survival and evolution. The Sith Eternal, in their infinite wisdom, recognized that chaos and order, darkness and light, were two halves of a larger whole, and only by ensuring both existed could the galaxy truly evolve. Their plan was one of long-term vision, not just to control the galaxy for a time, but to establish a new galactic order, one that would endure for generations. The Sith Eternal's vision for the galaxy was not one that would come to fruition immediately. Instead, their plan was long-term, designed to outlast Palpatine, the Empire, and even the fall of the Sith. This was a vision that would unfold slowly, taking generations to fully manifest. While the final order was the climax of their plan, it was not the end. In fact, the true power of the Sith Eternal lies in their ability to embed their ideas deeply into the galactic psyche, creating a future where the dark side would continually resurface, no matter how hard the galaxy tried to suppress it. The hidden Sith fleet on Exegol was a key element in this long-term plan, but it was never meant to be the end-all be-all of the Sith Eternal's influence. Instead, it was a symbol, a reminder that the Sith would always be waiting in the shadows, ready to reassert their dominance. The destruction of Palpatine and the fall of the Empire may have seemed like the ultimate victory for the Rebel Alliance and the Jedi Order, but the Sith Eternal were never truly defeated. They were an idea, and ideas cannot be destroyed. As long as the dark side exists, the Sith Eternal's influence will continue, carried on by those who understand the true power of the dark side and wish to shape the galaxy's future through it. One of the most significant aspects of the Sith Eternal's influence is their ability to shape the next generation of Sith Lords. While Palpatine was the figurehead of their vision, he was not the ultimate agent of their goals. The Sith Eternal's true power lay in their strategic use of apprentices, each one a vessel for the future of Sith power. Palpatine's apprenticeship system, with its focus on mastery of the dark side and personal power, was but one piece of the greater Sith Eternal plan. The Sith Eternal, through their agents, had been grooming future Sith to carry on their work long after Palpatine's death. Take, for example, the influence the Sith Eternal had on Kylo Ren Ben Solo. Although not directly affiliated with the Sith Eternal's known leaders, Kylo Ren's path was shaped by the dark side's legacy, one that extended back to the ancient Sith and the Sith Eternal's manipulation of galactic events. Snoke, the puppet of Palpatine and a creation of the Sith Eternal, served as Kylo Ren's mentor, guiding him down the dark path that would eventually lead him to attempt to reshape the galaxy in his own image. The Sith Eternal had long understood the importance of infiltrating the minds of the young, of shaping the next generation of Sith, and ensuring that the dark side would always find new champions. While the Jedi believed that the dark side could be eradicated, the Sith Eternal understood that the Force was ever-changing and that the light and dark would always be in conflict, perpetuating the need for both sides. Kylo Ren's rise was one of the direct results of the Sith Eternal's actions, which included the creation of Snoke, a dark figure whose purpose was to guide Ben Solo into embracing the Sith path. However, the true brilliance of the Sith Eternal's long-term manipulation was their ability to create an independent dark side leader without revealing their hand. Kylo Ren was not simply a vessel for Palpatine's will, but a product of the Sith Eternal's vision. A figure who could rise to power, create a new order, and ultimately return the *** galaxy to the state of galactic dominance that the Sith Eternal had always envisioned. Though his rule would eventually be toppled, Kylo Ren, like Palpatine before him, represented a new generation of Sith Lords that would continue the Sith Eternal's work, even if it took multiple generations to fully bear fruit. While Kylo Ren may have represented one form of Sith power, the Sith Eternal had other candidates in the shadows. The galaxy, after all, is vast, and the Sith Eternal understood that they would need multiple champions to ensure the dark side's survival. While Palpatine's failure was apparent in the rise of Rey and the eventual end of the Sith Empire, the Sith Eternal were long-term thinkers. Even with the death of their greatest figurehead, they ensured that their legacy would live on in the form of future Sith Lords and dark side leaders. The key to understanding the Sith Eternal's influence lies in the fact that they were not merely focused on immediate control, but were shaping the galaxy's future for generations. As much as they manipulated events in the short term, they understood that eternity meant something more. They knew that the galaxy was cyclical and that the dark side would rise again when the galaxy was ready to accept it. The Sith Eternal's philosophy was not about conquering, it was about embedding themselves into the fabric of the galaxy. They would be the long shadows that influenced galactic history, guiding the galaxy towards an inevitable balance between light and dark. It was this balance that they truly sought, one where the Sith were never eradicated, but always present, ready to guide the galaxy into a new era. Even after Palpatine's death, the Sith Eternal's influence remained. The rise of the First Order under Kylo Ren was the perfect example of the long-term strategy the Sith Eternal had in place. Though Snoke was destroyed, the dark side endured through Kylo Ren's relentless pursuit of power and the Sith Eternal's subtle guidance. Even with the apparent fall of Palpatine, the dark side remained woven into the very core of galactic conflict, suggesting that the Sith Eternal's plan had reached a new stage of fruition. The galaxy was moving toward a future that the Sith Eternal had always envisioned, one where the dark side could never be erased and would remain in perpetual struggle with the light side, ensuring that the Sith's role in the Force would endure for all time. In this context, the Sith Eternal's legacy is not defined solely by their tangible actions or military victories, but by the philosophical shift they initiated in the galaxy's understanding of the Force. They were the architects of the galaxy's future, not through direct conquest, but by subtly shaping how the galactic citizens viewed the Force itself. The Sith Eternal planted the seeds of dark side influence in the minds of those who would come after, ensuring that the Sith philosophy would remain a central force in the galaxy's destiny. The Sith Eternal were not mere followers of the dark side. They were its masters, delving deep into the mysteries of the Force in ways that most Jedi and Sith had never dared to explore. Their knowledge of the dark side was not simply an extension of the teachings of the Sith Lords who came before them. It was a revolutionary approach, one that sought to manipulate the very laws of nature itself. At the core of the Sith Eternal's plan was a belief in immortality, not just for the Sith Lords, but for the Sith philosophy itself. They were not satisfied with temporary victories or fleeting moments of power. They wanted something more, an enduring presence, one that would transcend death itself. This desire for eternal control over the galaxy, which could not be undone by time, was what set the Sith Eternal apart from every other Sith faction before them. The resurrection of Palpatine, an event that seemed impossible to many, was in fact the result of Sith Eternal's long-standing research into forbidden Sith rituals. Palpatine's return was not merely the product of cloning technology or dark side mastery alone. It was a revolutionary ritual that blended the most ancient and forbidden practices of the Sith with the cutting-edge dark arts. For years, the Sith Eternal had worked in secret on Exegol, hidden in the unknown regions, experimenting with ancient Sith alchemy and dark rituals that could manipulate the very essence of life and death. By bending the will of the Force itself, they created a process where death was no longer permanent, and the Sith could rise again even after being destroyed. Palpatine's resurrection was not as simple as transferring his consciousness into a clone body. Instead, it involved complex Sith rituals that reached back to the roots of Sith sorcery, where the dark side was used not just for power, but to manipulate the physical realm itself. The Sith Eternal, in their quest for immortality, tapped into the ancient knowledge of the Sith Lords who had once ruled the galaxy, long before Palpatine. These dark rituals were so powerful that they could allow a Sith to continue existing even after the body had been destroyed, effectively making them immortal. The Sith Eternal's ability to manipulate time was their greatest asset, and it allowed them to resurrect Palpatine at the most opportune moment, when the galaxy was on the brink of complete disarray, ready to accept a new Sith Empire. The return of Palpatine and the formation of the Final Order on Exegol were part of a larger strategy that the Sith Eternal had set into motion many years prior. The Final Order, with its massive fleet of Star Destroyers, was not merely a new military force. It was the culmination of their philosophical vision for the galaxy. The Sith Eternal did not want to simply conquer the galaxy. They sought to reshape it, and in their minds, the return of Palpatine was the key to achieving this. By resurrecting Palpatine, they were not just bringing back a leader, they were bringing back the embodiment of Sith power, dark side mastery, and the very Sith philosophy itself. Palpatine's return signified that the dark side was eternal, and that no matter how many times the galaxy tried to rid itself of it, it would always return, more powerful and more insidious than ever. The Sith Eternal's ability to manipulate the laws of life and death was not only a testament to their power, but also a reflection of their understanding of the natural order. The Sith believed that life and death were not opposites, but part of the same cycle, a cycle that could be controlled. Through Sith alchemy, they could alter the flow of life, ensuring that those who embraced the dark side could never truly be destroyed. This knowledge, passed down through generations of Sith, allowed the Sith Eternal to develop a process where the Force could be manipulated to create an enduring presence that would persist long after death. This manipulation of the Force created a new kind of Sith power, one that was not limited by the physical realm but could extend far beyond it. The resurrection of Palpatine was thus not just about bringing back an individual Sith Lord, it was about bringing back the entire Sith ideology, one that could now be eternal. Palpatine, in his return, would be the catalyst for a new era of Sith rule, one where the dark side would no longer be seen as an opposing force to the light, but as an inevitable presence that would exist in a perpetual balance with the galaxy's evolving needs. The Sith Eternal saw themselves as the true guardians of balance, ensuring that the dark side would always return, no matter how many times it was suppressed. Through Palpatine, they would shape the galaxy's future and ensure that the dark side would never be eradicated again. The resurrection of Palpatine was part of a much larger strategic plan. While the First Order rose to power under Kylo Ren and Snoke, the Sith Eternal were always pulling the strings behind the scenes. They didn't just want a return of the Sith Empire, they wanted to reshape the galaxy's entire future, ensuring that the dark side would be a central force in the galaxy's evolution. By embedding their ideas into the fabric of galactic society, the Sith Eternal sought to create a new generation of Sith, ones who would carry the legacy of the dark side far into the future. Their true plan was not just about controlling the galaxy, but about creating a new galaxy, one in which the Sith were the natural rulers and the dark side was no longer a hidden force, but an integral part of the galaxy's future. As Palpatine's return was cemented and the final order came into being, the Sith Eternal revealed their ultimate purpose, not to simply defeat their enemies, but to ensure that the Sith philosophy would be eternally ingrained in the galaxy's psyche. They would create a future where the Sith could not be destroyed, where the dark side would always have a foothold in the galaxy, regardless of how hard the Jedi tried to suppress it. This future, shaped by the Sith Eternal's manipulation, would rise again each time the galaxy tried to eliminate them. Their immortality, ensured through dark rituals and their ability to manipulate life and death, meant that no matter how many times the Sith were defeated, they would always come back, stronger than ever, ready to reshape the galaxy in their image. The Sith Eternal were not just hidden manipulators operating in the shadows of galactic history, they were the architects of the future. Even though the Empire fell, and Palpatine's death seemed to mark the end of the Sith's political reign, the Sith Eternal's legacy would prove to be more than just a passing phase. Their vision for the galaxy transcended the temporal rule of one Sith Lord or one empire. The Sith Eternal had a far more insidious plan, one that would span generations and ensure that their dark influence could not be easily wiped away. Even after the fall of the Sith Empire, their shadow would persist in the form of powerful dark side forces, covert operations, and manipulations that would continue to shape the galaxy's fate. One of the most profound aspects of the Sith Eternal's legacy was the corruption of the galactic political system. While the Empire was destroyed, the ideas planted by the Sith Eternal continued to affect the galaxy's political structure. The First Order, though seemingly an entity born out of the Rebel Alliance's victory, was an extension of the Sith Eternal's influence. The hidden Sith fleet on Exegol was not simply a military threat, it was a symbol of the Sith Eternal's goal to create an enduring, secretive presence in the galaxy's future. They understood that power, especially the kind they sought, could not be sustained through the traditional means of ruling openly. Instead, they placed their trust in long-term manipulation, ensuring that the dark side would continue to flow in the veins of galactic politics, even when the Jedi and the Rebel Alliance thought they had triumphed. By instilling the dark side philosophy into the galaxy's political framework, the Sith Eternal ensured that Palpatine's defeat was not a permanent loss for the Sith. The First Order arose from the ashes of the Empire, but its roots were in the Sith Eternal's long-standing influence. Palpatine's cloning technology and dark rituals were not his own. They were brought to fruition by the Sith Eternal. Their ability to work in the background, infiltrating galactic institutions and creating loyal followers in high places, meant that their power did not depend on the rise and fall of any one leader. Instead, they had built a system of dark side followers who would continue their work, whether in the form of the First Order or future factions that would rise to power after the fall of the Empire. One of the most insidious aspects of the Sith Eternal's philosophy was their understanding of legacy. They were not simply interested in short-term victories. They sought to create a long-lasting cultural shift that would ensure their dark influence remained embedded in the galaxy for generations to come. Through their subtle manipulation of galactic politics, they created an interwoven web of influence that would be difficult to untangle. For centuries, the galaxy had been divided between the Jedi, who sought to suppress the dark side, and the Sith, who sought to wield it for their own power. The Sith Eternal understood that true power came from a balance, not the domination of one side, but the constant tension between light and dark. They saw themselves not as the opposers of the Jedi, but as the guardians of the true nature of the Force, ensuring that the dark side would never be eradicated. Their philosophy was one that accepted darkness as a necessary force in the galaxy's progression, and their hidden manipulations ensured that the galactic balance would always lean toward their desired outcome. Even after the events on Exegol, when Palpatine was finally defeated by the rebels and Rey, the Sith Eternal's influence did not disappear. Their legacy was embedded in the galaxy's very structure, in the minds of those who had been influenced by them. The Jedi Order itself had been weakened by their manipulation, as they had never truly understood the balance between the light and the dark. The Jedi had suppressed the dark side, refusing to accept its role in the Force, and in doing so, they had made themselves vulnerable to the very philosophy that the Sith Eternal represented. The Sith Eternal knew that the Jedi's greatest weakness was their refusal to acknowledge the dark side as a necessary force. They understood that the galaxy's perception of the Force had been skewed by the Jedi's narrow view, and their goal was to expand that view, to ensure that the dark side was never forgotten or ignored. As we look to the future, the Sith Eternal's influence will continue to manifest in ways that we might not even recognize. Their ability to manipulate history and their strategic use of cloning, dark rituals, and influence over key individuals ensures that they will always have a hand in the galaxy's future. The First Order, Kylo Ren, and the rise of new Sith Lords are just one example of the Sith Eternal's ongoing legacy. Even though their direct control may have been diminished, their philosophy and dark side practices are embedded deep within the galactic institutions and will likely continue to shape the galaxy for years to come. Their influence, while seemingly defeated, has only transformed into something more subtle, more insidious, something that will continue to rise whenever the galaxy's balance is threatened. The Sith Eternal's greatest triumph lies in their ability to outlast their enemies, to embed themselves into the very psychological makeup of the galaxy's future. By manipulating key events, creating dark side disciples, and ensuring that the dark side would never be eradicated, they set into motion a future where the galactic balance would be forever in flux, with the dark side constantly pulling the galaxy toward its influence. They understood that the future was not something that could be shaped in a single generation. It was something that would unfold over time, with the Sith Eternal's hidden hands guiding the way. Even after the death of Palpatine, the Sith Eternal's influence persisted in ways that were difficult to detect. Their ability to manipulate and reshape the destiny of individuals, families, and entire factions was not merely about the Sith Lords of the past, but about controlling the psychological narrative of the galaxy. The Jedi, long thought to be the true force of balance in the galaxy, were also manipulated by the Sith Eternal, as their narrow view of the Force left them susceptible to the dark side's pull. The Sith Eternal understood that the galaxy's future was not simply shaped by political victories or military might, but by the psychological conditioning of its leaders and their understanding of the Force. Through subtle interventions, the Sith Eternal planted seeds in the minds of future Jedi and Sith alike. Their long-term psychological manipulation was not confined to Palpatine but extended to figures like Kylo Ren and Rey, who both became central players in the future battle for the galaxy's soul. While Kylo Ren was directly shaped by Palpatine's resurrection and the Sith Eternal's influence, Rey, on the other hand, represented the other side of the coin, the Jedi path. Both were products of the Sith Eternal's grand design, and their choices and destinies would be the ultimate test of the Sith Eternal's plan. Kylo Ren's psychological transformation was directly influenced by the Sith Eternal. While he was not raised in the traditional Sith teachings under a master like Palpatine or Darth Vader, Kylo Ren's path was guided by the dark side through his connection with Snoke, a creation of the Sith Eternal. Snoke, though a puppet of Palpatine, represented an extension of the Sith Eternal's reach, guiding Ben Solo toward the dark side and manipulating him into believing that his destiny lay in the pursuit of power. Kylo Ren's journey was one of self-doubt, manipulation, and the search for a new purpose, all of which were fostered by the Sith Eternal's subtle long-term influence. By turning Kylo Ren, the Sith Eternal hoped to resurrect the Sith Order without directly returning to the old methods of conquest. They used Kylo Ren to reshape the galaxy, even if his ultimate goals did not align perfectly with theirs. The Sith Eternal were also deeply aware of the power of familial connections and psychological conflict. Kylo Ren's story is one defined by the struggle between the light and the dark, an inner battle that is at the core of the Sith Eternal's influence. By targeting Ben Solo and turning him against his own legacy as the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa, the Sith Eternal manipulated his psychological vulnerabilities. They understood that the Jedi were strongest when they were unified, and the dark side sought to exploit familial ties to create divisions and inner conflict. Kylo Ren's destiny was shaped by the Sith Eternal, as he was molded into an instrument of chaos that could destabilize the galaxy and ultimately bring the dark side to the forefront once more. On the other hand, Rey's journey was also intricately connected to the Sith Eternal's plan. Though Rey initially seemed like a new hope for the Jedi, a figure who could restore balance and bring an end to the Sith, she was ultimately drawn into the Sith Eternal's scheme. The revelation of her lineage as Palpatine's granddaughter was a direct result of the Sith Eternal's long-term planning. Rey was never meant to be a simple Jedi. She was the final test for the Sith Eternal's plan. Through Rey's resistance to the dark side, the Sith Eternal sought to determine whether the galaxy's balance could be restored by one individual, whether it was even possible for someone to escape the influence of the Sith Eternal and bring about true change. The psychological struggle that Rey experienced throughout her journey was no accident. The Sith Eternal used her connection to Palpatine to manipulate her into facing her own fears and desires. By revealing that Rey's power came from the Sith lineage, they created a conflict within her that was essential to their plan to see if she could rise above her genetic destiny and embrace the light side, or if she would fall into the same trap as Kylo Ren and her ancestor Palpatine. The Sith Eternal's influence was subtle but significant, as they knew that the dark side was not just about power but about temptation and personal choice. Rey's eventual victory over the dark side was a significant moment, but it also showed the Sith Eternal's mastery of psychological manipulation. Even if their direct influence was limited in her life, the Sith Eternal's legacy ensured that she would confront the dark side in ways that ultimately shaped the galactic future. The clash between Kylo Ren and Rey in the final battle was not just a struggle between two individuals, but also a battle for the future of the galaxy. The Sith Eternal's legacy created this tension, ensuring that both sides of the Force would have to collide before the final balance could be achieved. It was not about the individual victories of the Sith or the Jedi, but about the balance that the Sith Eternal knew would have to be maintained. Their role was never to be the leaders of the galaxy, but rather to ensure that the darkness would always return and that no victory could last forever. They understood that chaos and order would always coexist, and that the galaxy would always be shaped by the psychological conflict between these two opposing forces. Even after Palpatine's death, the Sith Eternal's influence on the galaxy's psyche was immeasurable. The psychological scars left by the Sith's manipulation would remain for generations. The Jedi were forced to question their teachings, and the rebels had to reckon with the power of the dark side, which had influenced the galaxy from the very beginning. The Sith Eternal's ability to manipulate minds, create conflict, and shape destinies ensured that their dark legacy would never fade, no matter how many times the galaxy thought they had defeated it. Their true influence lay in their ability to control perceptions, ensuring that the Sith's philosophy would always have a place in the galaxy, waiting to be reborn when the time was right. The galaxy's future, after the fall of Palpatine, was not as much a victory for the Rebel Alliance or the Jedi Order, as it was an open playing field where the Sith Eternal's influence could continue to shape events, manipulating the emerging factions and creating new powers that would carry on their vision. The Rebel Alliance that rose against the Empire had its roots in the dark history of the galaxy, with its own divisions and secrets. The Jedi, though victorious in many ways, were still at odds with the galactic view of the Force, as their perception of balance was one-sided, focused on the suppression of the dark side, without understanding its essential role in the universe. Even as the Rebel Alliance succeeded in destroying the Empire and the Jedi Order rose to prominence in the aftermath, the Sith Eternal continued to work in the shadows, subtly manipulating galactic leaders, Jedi and dark side users alike, to ensure that their dark legacy was never fully eradicated. One of the primary methods the Sith Eternal used to influence the galaxy was through seeding ideologies that blended the dark side with the light. They recognized that the rebels, despite their successes, were not immune to the seductive nature of the dark side. While the rebels' original goal was to overthrow the Empire and establish a new, more democratic system, the Sith Eternal planted ideas and psychological seeds in key leaders within the Rebel Alliance to ultimately shift the future towards a force of perpetual conflict. The dark side was not about domination alone. It was about creating a dynamic tension that would ensure the galaxy never fell into peace, which they saw as stagnation. Leia Organa, a central figure in the Rebel Alliance, was not simply a political leader, but also a Force-sensitive individual. While she was a Jedi by birth, her destiny was shaped by the dark side's influence, and the Sith Eternal knew that her path would always be shaped by the dark side's manipulation of her emotions. Her connection to Kylo Ren, her son, was a pivotal element in the Sith Eternal's long-term plan. The fact that Leia's struggle was deeply tied to the Sith Eternal's ideology, even when she sought to push for peace, highlights the paradox of the Sith Eternal's manipulation. They did not need to fully conquer the galaxy. They simply needed to stir emotional conflict and psychological tension. The dark side would always have a hand in shaping these conflicts, no matter what. In parallel to the Jedi Order, which was reformed after the fall of the Empire, the Sith Eternal subtly shaped the next generation of Jedi by influencing their understanding of the Force and its balance. The Jedi were taught that the dark side was to be feared and suppressed, which played directly into the Sith Eternal's hands. While the Jedi sought to avoid attachment and emotional connections to maintain their clarity, the Sith Eternal understood that such teachings inherently led to psychological repression. By pushing the Jedi Order to repress emotion, they inadvertently created future generations that would be vulnerable to the dark side, especially when confronted with feelings of anger, fear, and loss. The Jedi's disconnection from their emotions was a psychological fracture that the Sith Eternal could exploit. Leaders such as Luke Skywalker, though ultimately pivotal in the battle against the dark side, were still shaped by the Jedi dogma that pushed them away from embracing their true potential. In his later years, Luke Skywalker came to realize the inherent flaw in the Jedi's approach to the Force as he encountered the danger of repressed emotions and the cycle of failure that followed. His decision to seclude himself and avoid training new Jedi came from his recognition of the Jedi's limitations. Luke's journey demonstrated that the Sith Eternal's influence was not just in creating conflict between the Jedi and the Sith, but in breaking the cycle of galactic peace. Even with the end of the Sith Empire, the dark side could always find a way to reassert itself, especially through Jedi who were fractured or unprepared for the temptations of the Force's darker aspects. Even after Palpatine's death and the fall of the Empire, the Sith Eternal's subtle machinations continued to affect the galaxy's future. Their ability to remain hidden, working from the shadows, allowed them to influence the very fabric of galactic society. By embedding Sith teachings into galactic systems, they ensured that future dark side users would not simply rise from the ashes of Palpatine's empire, but would emerge from the psychological manipulation of the Sith Eternal. Kylo Ren's journey, for example, was shaped not just by Snoke, but by the Sith Eternal's manipulations of his internal conflict. Even as Kylo Ren sought to break free from the Sith's grip, the Sith Eternal's influence guided him back to the dark side, revealing their true power, not in ruling openly, but in manipulating the psychological evolution of the galaxy's key figures. The Sith Eternal's true strength was not in their military might or political power, but in their ability to manipulate emotions, create inner conflict, and ensure that the dark side would never be eradicated. They were masters of psychological warfare, able to create fissures in the minds of their opponents and exploit those weaknesses to their advantage. Their influence spread far beyond the Sith Lords they had once backed. It was embedded in the very nature of the Force, the galaxy's emotional vulnerabilities, and the psychological struggles of its people. As the galaxy's heroes faced their inner demons, the Sith Eternal's presence would always be felt. The Sith Eternal were not merely a faction born out of Palpatine's reign or the events of the Galactic Empire. Their influence and ideology were deeply rooted in the ancient Sith teachings, practices, and dark side rituals that stretched back to the very origins of the Sith Order. The Sith, as an ideology, did not start with Darth Bane or Palpatine. It began with Sith Lords of ancient times, such as Darth Revan, Naga Sato, and Exar Kun, who crafted the foundation of what would become a galaxy-spanning legacy. These figures believed in the Sith's philosophy of passion, strength, and emotional mastery, and they left behind a vast treasure trove of arcane knowledge. The Sith Eternal understood that to truly rise again, they had to rediscover and revive these ancient teachings, particularly the rituals that enabled Sith Lords to transcend death and continue influencing events across the galaxy. The ancient Sith knowledge was largely lost or hidden, either buried in the Sith tombs on distant worlds like Korriban or Exegol, or locked away in the secret archives of the Jedi Order. However, the Sith Eternal made it their mission to uncover these secrets, believing that the dark side of the Force was not just a tool of destruction, but a tool of creation, one that could reshape reality itself. This pursuit of ancient Sith knowledge, particularly the rituals of immortality, was central to the Sith Eternal's goal of creating a galaxy where the Sith philosophy would never be erased. Unlike other Sith Lords who were content with short-lived empires, the Sith Eternal aimed to build an eternal order, and they knew that this required more than just conquering worlds. It required manipulating time and life itself. One of the most dangerous practices revived by the Sith Eternal was the use of Sith alchemy, an ancient form of dark side sorcery that involved the manipulation of life forms and the creation of life itself. This practice was forbidden by the Jedi and shrouded in secrecy even among the Sith, as it required total mastery of the dark side and the Force's natural balance. Sith alchemy allowed the Sith to create life, transform creatures, and even resurrect the dead. The Sith Eternal, in their search for immortality, discovered ways to revive Sith Lords and other dark side figures from death, giving them a new form of power. This would become essential for Palpatine's resurrection, as it allowed him to be brought back in a cloned form, where his essence could be transferred into a new body, an act that not only defied death, but also defied the natural flow of life. Another vital aspect of the Sith Eternal's rise was their manipulation of ancient Sith artifacts, objects of incredible power that had been hidden away for millennia. These artifacts were not just symbols of Sith power, they were vessels of dark side energy, capable of amplifying the powers of those who could control them. Some of these artifacts were believed to contain the souls of past Sith Lords, while others were imbued with the raw power of the dark side, capable of granting those who possessed them nearly godlike abilities. The Sith Eternal understood the importance of these artifacts and set out to rediscover them, using them not only as sources of power, but as tools for manipulating galactic events. The most significant of these artifacts was the Sith Wayfinder, a device that allowed its user to navigate the galaxy's most dangerous regions, including the unknown regions where the Sith Eternal had set up their final stronghold on Exegol. The Sith Eternal also used the Wayfinder to hide their secret fleet and ensure that they could remain hidden from the galaxy's major powers. By controlling the Wayfinders, the Sith Eternal ensured that they could move unseen and unnoticed in the galaxy, waiting for the perfect moment to reassert their influence. In addition to Wayfinders, the Sith Eternal also resurrected ancient Sith temples, such as those on Exegol, where they could perform rituals to enhance their power and expand their control over the galaxy. The Sith Eternal's practice of Sith sorcery was centered around these temples, where they could draw upon the dark energies contained within the ancient Sith worlds. These rituals were not just meant to amplify the power of their leaders, they were designed to bind the Sith to the galaxy's future, ensuring that they could maintain their influence for generations. The temples, with their hidden knowledge and dark side rituals, were the foundation of the Sith Eternal's immortal plan, giving them the means to survive the fall of empires and continue shaping the galaxy's destiny from the shadows. The most disturbing aspect of the Sith Eternal's use of ancient Sith knowledge was their manipulation of the Force's balance itself. The Sith Eternal's ultimate goal was not to simply conquer the galaxy, but to reshape the very structure of the Force to fit their desires. While the Jedi Order focused on the light side, believing that the Force should be kept in balance by rejecting its dark side, the Sith Eternal sought to harness both sides of the Force, seeing them as two necessary elements in an eternal cycle of galactic evolution. They believed that the galaxy could not grow, evolve, or maintain true balance without the presence of the dark side. Their approach to Sith knowledge was grounded in their belief that chaos and order were two forces that needed to coexist, a belief that would ultimately drive the future of the galaxy, ensuring that no era of peace or light side dominance could last. Through their rediscovery of ancient Sith practices, the Sith Eternal ensured that their power would never be truly eradicated. Their resurrection of Palpatine was just one part of their larger strategy to embed Sith philosophy into the galaxy's very structure. By manipulating the dark side of the Force and using the ancient rituals that connected it to the past, the Sith Eternal could create a future where the Sith were always present, waiting to rise again when the galaxy's balance shifted toward the dark side once more. The Sith Eternal were not content with simply establishing dominance or rule over the galaxy. They sought to embed their dark influence deeply within the psychological fabric of future generations. They understood that true power was not just in controlling governments, armies, or even galactic institutions. It was about controlling the minds of those who would inherit the galaxy's future. Kylo Ren and Rey, two central figures in the ongoing struggle between the dark side and light, were psychologically manipulated by the Sith Eternal without them even knowing it. Kylo Ren's journey, from the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa to the dark side leader of the First Order, was intricately shaped by the Sith Eternal. While Snoke served as the immediate puppet master guiding Kylo Ren, the true manipulator was the Sith Eternal, which had been subtly influencing Kylo's path from the very beginning. The Sith Eternal had sensed Kylo's potential for greatness and darkness early on. They recognized that his connection to Palpatine and his family history made him a perfect candidate to carry on their legacy, even if he did not fully understand the depth of their manipulation. From a young age, Kylo Ren was trained to believe that he was destined for power, but that power was not meant to be used for good. It was meant to serve the Sith Eternal's vision. His inherited family conflict, the tension between his Jedi heritage and his dark side tendencies, was expertly exploited by the Sith Eternal, who knew that internal conflict was the key to personal growth in the dark side. The more Kylo Ren struggled with his legacy, the more the Sith Eternal's influence over him grew. They had created a perfect storm of psychological tension in which Kylo could never fully embrace the light because the dark side's power was always just out of reach, and the Sith Eternal made sure it would stay that way. As Kylo Ren grew in power, so did his dependence on the dark side, but the more he embraced it, the more he was enslaved by it. His psychological battle between light and dark was not just a battle for control over his own actions, it was a battle that fed the Sith Eternal's grand plan. Kylo Ren's ultimate fall into the dark side was not a natural consequence of his choices, but a psychological manipulation orchestrated over years by the Sith Eternal, who knew that the galaxy would need a dark side leader to counter the growing light side movement led by Rey. While Kylo Ren's path was shaped by external influence, Rey's journey was equally impacted by the Sith Eternal's designs, albeit in a different way. Initially, Rey seemed to be the embodiment of hope and resistance against the dark side. She was the Jedi's last hope, a Force-sensitive individual who could restore balance and defeat the Sith once and for all. However, the Sith Eternal had been preparing for this moment from the start. Through their manipulation of Rey's lineage, they ensured that she would eventually have to face the dark side, not just as an external force, but as an internal conflict rooted in her ancestry. The revelation that Rey was Palpatine's granddaughter was a master stroke of psychological manipulation by the Sith Eternal. They did not just create a conflict for Rey with the dark side, they forced her to confront her own lineage, her connection to the Sith, the very thing she had been trained to despise. This genetic inheritance was more than just a plot device. It was a psychological trap designed to make Rey doubt herself, her purpose, and her place in the galaxy. The Sith Eternal understood that to bring about their vision of galactic conflict, they needed to sow doubt in the minds of those who would rise against them. By forcing Rey to confront her past, to acknowledge her Sith heritage, the Sith Eternal ensured that she would always struggle with the temptations of the dark side. The psychological trauma that Rey faced, wondering whether she was truly the hero she believed herself to be, was part of the Sith Eternal's long-term plan. They wanted Rey to struggle with the dark side, to realize that balance could never truly be achieved without accepting both sides of the Force. In many ways, the Sith Eternal were not trying to create another Palpatine, but a more complex and powerful force in the galaxy, one that would embody the conflict between light and dark, and that could never fully escape the influence of the Sith Eternal. Even the Jedi, despite their seeming victory over the Sith, were not immune to the Sith Eternal's influence. The psychological manipulation of the Jedi was more subtle but equally profound. The Jedi, in their efforts to preserve peace and order, inadvertently left themselves vulnerable to the Sith Eternal's influence by rejecting the dark side entirely. The Jedi Order's failure to acknowledge the dark side as a force of balance meant that they were prone to internal conflict when faced with true tests of strength. Luke Skywalker, for example, fell into isolation not just because of his failure to train new Jedi, but because he could not reconcile the light and dark aspects of the Force. The Sith Eternal knew that balance in the galaxy would never be achieved unless the Jedi accepted the reality that the dark side was inevitable and could not simply be eradicated. Through the Sith Eternal's manipulation, the Jedi Order was forced to face their greatest internal conflict, unable to see that their moral absolutism was not the answer to galactic peace. Their fear of the dark side led them to ignore its role in the galactic balance, setting the stage for future failures. Even Luke, despite his redemption of the Jedi, could not escape the influence of the Sith Eternal's teachings, for the dark side had become so ingrained in the galaxy's culture and its understanding of the Force that it could not simply be ignored. The Sith Eternal understood that true domination was not merely about controlling armies or galactic politics, but about shaping the minds and belief systems of the galaxy's inhabitants. Their ultimate plan was not to simply conquer the galaxy, but to reshape the very foundations of how the Force was perceived and understood by those who lived under its sway. To do this, the Sith Eternal worked not only with powerful Sith Lords and dark side users, but also with cultural leaders, philosophers, and even scholars who could influence the galaxy's societal norms. By manipulating galactic institutions, from the HoloNet to the Jedi Archives, and from the Republic Senate to the corporate sectors, the Sith Eternal ensured that their philosophy was subtly embedded into the galactic cultural DNA. They didn't want to rule through fear alone. They wanted to create a galaxy where the Sith's influence was so interwoven with the fabric of society that no government, faction, or political power could ever erase it. The Jedi Order, in particular, was one of the key targets for the Sith Eternal's subtle influence. While the Jedi were seen as the guardians of peace and the antithesis of the Sith Eternal understood that the Jedi's ideals of peace and detachment were ultimately unsustainable. By encouraging the Jedi to suppress their emotions and to reject the dark side, the Sith Eternal created a power vacuum in the galaxy, one where the Jedi's moral absolutism left them vulnerable to manipulation by the very forces they sought to control. The Jedi's refusal to acknowledge the dark side as a necessary force in the galaxy ensured that the Sith would always find new opportunities to rise again. The cultural suppression of the dark side was one of the most insidious tactics employed by the Sith Eternal. By making the dark side seem taboo or evil, the Sith Eternal ensured that anyone who embraced the light side was never truly whole. The dark side was not simply about selfishness or destruction, but about passion, emotion, and personal empowerment. The Sith Eternal believed that emotions like anger, fear, and hate could be channeled for growth, strength, and change. In a galaxy that tried to suppress these emotions, the Sith Eternal sowed the seeds of internal conflict in future generations, ensuring that the dark side would always have a presence, no matter how much the galaxy tried to ignore it. One of the most powerful ways the Sith Eternal affected galactic culture was through their role in galactic history. The Sith Eternal manipulated historical narratives, ensuring that the dark side's influence was either erased, misrepresented, or reframed to serve their goals. For instance, Palpatine's rise to power wasn't simply a matter of a power-hungry politician seizing control. It was the culmination of a plan that was decades in the making. The Sith Eternal's hand could be seen in every war, every political maneuver, and every conflict that shaped the galaxy. By controlling the narrative, the Sith Eternal ensured that their legacy would live on in the stories of the galaxy, even if they were never openly acknowledged. The Sith Eternal's influence also extended to the dark side's practitioners who followed in their wake. After Palpatine's death, the First Order was established, and while it was technically a military regime, it was deeply tied to the dark side of the Force. Leaders like Kylo Ren, even though they may not have directly known the Sith Eternal's exact plan, were the products of the philosophical groundwork laid by the Sith Eternal. They ensured that the dark side would always find champions in every generation, from Snoke to Kylo Ren to the rise of new Sith Lords who would continue their legacy. What is most interesting about the Sith Eternal's cultural manipulation is how they did not need to actively control every aspect of the galaxy. Instead, they created pockets of dark side energy, places where the dark side could rise in the form of new cults, leaders, and dark side users who would either create chaos or help to manipulate galactic history. They understood that true power was not in controlling every individual, but in controlling the ideas that drove those individuals. The Sith Eternal's greatest strength was their ability to shape the future, not by ruling it directly, but by ensuring that their ideas would continue to influence the galaxy's development. Even in the face of Rey's victory over Palpatine, the Sith Eternal's influence persisted. It was not merely that the Sith Lords would continue to return, it was that the galactic future would always be shaped by the dark side's influence, whether through Kylo Ren's redemption arc, the new Force-sensitive leaders that emerged, or the cyclical nature of light and dark in the galaxy. The Sith Eternal had created a perpetual struggle, one that could never truly end. No matter how many times the Jedi or the light side seemingly triumphed, the Sith Eternal knew that the dark side would always return and they would always be there to guide it. In this way, the Sith Eternal's legacy is not one of dominance, but of perpetual influence. They did not need to rule the galaxy with an iron fist, they needed to embed their philosophy into the galactic psyche. Through psychological manipulation, cultural influence, and their subtle but ever-present hand in the galactic narrative, they created a galaxy in which the dark side would always be woven into the fabric of its future, ensuring that the light side would never be free from conflict. The Sith Eternal were more than just a shadow organization working behind the scenes to manipulate the galaxy's politics and leaders. Their grand vision extended to the cosmic plane, where their influence sought to manipulate the very fabric of the Force itself. They understood that true power did not lie in temporary victories or single wars, but in creating an eternal balance, a balance that would ensure the dark side would always have its place alongside the light. Unlike many Sith who sought to dominate the galaxy, the Sith Eternal's true ambition was to create a cosmic cycle that would ensure chaos and order would never cease, and that the dark side would always rise again, no matter how many times it was defeated. This eternal conflict, where the Sith and Jedi were in a constant state of opposition, would ensure that the Force itself would remain in a state of perpetual flux. This balance, in the eyes of the Sith Eternal, was not a symmetrical harmony between light and dark, but a dynamic tension where both forces could continue to grow and evolve, with neither side ever fully eclipsing the other. The Sith Eternal recognized that the galaxy's future was not going to be shaped by a single empire or generation of Sith Lords. Their plan required long-term thinking, stretching beyond the lifetimes of even the greatest Sith, to create a force that would remain constant and relevant for all time. To achieve this, they needed to influence the very balance of the Force, ensuring that darkness and light could never exist in isolation, but always as two halves of a whole. In this way, the Sith Eternal's influence became an intrinsic part of the cosmic forces at play throughout the galaxy. They sought not to defeat the Jedi, but to ensure that the light would always have a counterbalance in the dark side. In order to ensure that the Sith Eternal could continue to exert their influence, they developed secret rituals that could alter the very structure of the Force. These rituals were not merely about gaining power or controlling individuals, they were about shaping the very flow of the Force in the galaxy. The Sith Eternal sought to ensure that the dark side would always be a natural and necessary part of the universe's existence, ensuring that no temporal peace or light side dominance could last forever. This would create a perpetual state of imbalance, ensuring that the Sith could always rise again no matter how much the galaxy tried to eradicate them. The most significant of these rituals involved the manipulation of the Force itself. The Sith Eternal understood that the Force was a living, evolving entity, one that could be shaped and redirected over time. They discovered methods of using the dark side to influence the Force's flow, allowing them to create pockets of dark side energy in the galaxy, where the Sith could operate in secrecy. These areas were not just places of power, they were places where the dark side was allowed to thrive, ensuring that the Sith Eternal's influence would continue to spread, even in the face of the Jedi's attempts to suppress it. The Sith Eternal's most profound impact on the galaxy's cosmic destiny lay in their ability to disrupt the natural order of the Force. While the Jedi and the Sith had long fought for dominance over the Force, the Sith Eternal sought to reshape it entirely. Their efforts to manipulate the dark side ensured that the galaxy's future would not be one of permanent peace, but of constant change, conflict, and evolution. They believed that without the chaos of the dark side, the galaxy would stagnate. The Sith Eternal understood that order alone was insufficient for growth. The dark side was necessary for the Force's continued evolution, and they made it their life's work to ensure that light and dark would always be locked in eternal struggle. Even after the death of Palpatine, the Sith Eternal's influence would continue to have cosmic ramifications. Their rituals, their manipulation of the Force, and their deep-seated belief in balance ensured that their influence would extend far beyond the physical realm. The galaxy's future would not be decided by the victory of the light side, but by the continuous pull of the dark side, ensuring that the Sith Eternal's vision of cosmic conflict would persist. The Sith Eternal had ensured that the balance of the Force would always shift in their favor, creating a galaxy where the dark side would always have its place in the future of the galaxy. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Sith Eternal's cosmic manipulation was their ability to create a feedback loop that ensured the galaxy's conflict would never end. By manipulating key figures like Kylo Ren, Rey, and the Jedi, the Sith Eternal ensured that the galaxy's future would always be in turmoil, with the dark side continuously influencing those who would shape its future. Even the rise of new Sith Lords and Jedi could not break the cycle that the Sith Eternal had set in motion. The Sith Eternal knew that as long as the dark side remained a force of balance in the galaxy, their influence would never truly fade. They had created a system where the dark side was not only essential for the galaxy's future, but also an irresistible force that would always return when the galaxy needed it most. The Sith Eternal's influence on galactic governance was perhaps their most enduring contribution to the galaxy's future. While Palpatine's empire was destroyed, the Sith Eternal's hand remained ever present, subtly shaping the political ideologies that emerged in the wake of the Empire's collapse. The New Republic, born from the Rebel Alliance, may have celebrated the defeat of the Empire, but it unwittingly carried forward the philosophical remnants of the Sith Eternal's manipulation. The Republic's ideals of freedom and democracy were influenced by Sith Eternal thought, which understood that true power was never just about dominance, but about creating institutions that could subtly perpetuate control. The Sith Eternal's legacy didn't end with the destruction of Palpatine, but rather with the continuation of the struggle between light and dark, peace and conflict, that the Sith Eternal had set in motion long before the Empire's rise. The creation of the First Order, in the wake of the New Republic, was a testament to the Sith Eternal's enduring power. The First Order was not simply a new galactic regime. It was an extension of the Sith Eternal's vision for a galaxy at war, where the dark side's influence could always find a way to reassert itself, even in the absence of Palpatine. One of the most insidious aspects of the Sith Eternal's influence was their ability to embed themselves into the political fabric of the galaxy without directly ruling. Instead of simply establishing a totalitarian regime, the Sith Eternal crafted a subtle system of control where their dark influence could persist through institutions, military organizations, and even galactic trade. They planted the idea that control and order could be maintained without overt tyranny, ensuring that future leaders would be drawn to authoritarianism without realizing they were being manipulated by the very philosophy the Sith Eternal had planted in the galactic psyche. The First Order was an embodiment of this manipulation. It was not merely a successor to the Empire, but the legacy of the Sith Eternal's work in shaping future political systems. The Sith Eternal's influence on the military was also profound. Through the rise of the First Order, the galactic military was restructured to ensure that the dark side's philosophy would continue to shape the future of military power. Instead of relying solely on brute force, as Palpatine did with the Death Star, the Sith Eternal understood that subtlety and manipulation were equally as important in maintaining control. The First Order's militaristic structure, its obsession with order and loyalty, reflected the Sith Eternal's belief in creating an eternal structure of power that could transcend the rise and fall of individual Sith leaders. They knew that to create lasting change, they would need to embed Sith philosophy into every institution of power, ensuring that no matter what form of government arose after the fall of the Empire, the dark side would always have a way to assert itself. The Sith Eternal's manipulation of galactic society went beyond politics and military power. They understood that true control lay in shaping the minds of the people. In the aftermath of the Empire's fall, the New Republic set out to create a new social order, one based on the ideals of democracy, freedom, and peace. But even as the Rebel Alliance celebrated the victory over the Empire, the Sith Eternal's influence subtly undermined the Republic's ideals. Their long-standing manipulation of galactic culture, where the dark side was always seen as a force of destruction to be feared and suppressed, ensured that the Sith philosophy would persist, even in the most peaceful of times. The Sith Eternal planted the idea that there could be no true peace without the presence of conflict, a concept that would resonate with future leaders and rebel movements. The socialization of conflict was another key element of the Sith Eternal's philosophy. Through their subtle manipulation of galactic narratives, they ensured that war and struggle would always remain part of the galaxy's future. By instilling in future generations the belief that the galaxy could never be at peace, the Sith Eternal ensured that strife and chaos would always be present. This idea not only shaped future Sith Lords like Kylo Ren, but also those who opposed them, creating a perpetual cycle of conflict that would ensure the dark side would always rise when the galaxy became complacent. The Sith Eternal understood that true peace was an illusion, and that only through constant tension could the galaxy continue to grow and evolve. The Sith Eternal's impact was not only seen in the political and military arenas, but also in galactic culture. Their subtle manipulation of cultural norms ensured that the dark side's influence would always have a place in the galaxy. Through the creation of new factions, the rise of Sith-like figures, and the development of new power structures, the Sith Eternal ensured that the light side could never truly dominate the galaxy. The first steps of the First Order and Kylo Ren's rise were only the beginning of a new era where the dark side would always have its place, regardless of the victories of the light. The Sith Eternal understood that the galaxy's future would not just be shaped by the victories or failures of the current generation of Sith or Jedi. It would be decided by the next generation. They were long-term thinkers, and their plan was to imbue the future of the galaxy with the Sith philosophy in ways that were not immediately obvious, but would shape the galaxy's balance for generations to come. By subtly manipulating the training of Force-sensitive individuals, both Jedi and Sith, the Sith Eternal ensured that the dark side would always have a presence, and that the balance of the Force would never truly shift in one direction or another. One of the most insidious ways the Sith Eternal influenced the next generation was through their manipulation of the Jedi Order. The Jedi, while striving to train their younglings in the ways of the light side, were unknowingly influenced by the Sith Eternal in their training practices. By rejecting the dark side completely, the Jedi created a power vacuum within their own ranks, making themselves vulnerable to the dark side's temptations. The Sith Eternal were keenly aware that the Jedi's refusal to accept the dark side as an inherent part of the Force would lead to future generations of Jedi who were psychologically unprepared to face the temptations of the dark side. This rejection of the dark side caused emotional repression in Jedi, making them more susceptible to fear, anger, and attachment, emotions that could lead them to the dark side despite their best intentions. The Sith Eternal's influence on the Jedi's training methods was subtle but profound. By teaching the Jedi Order that the dark side should be feared and suppressed, the Sith Eternal ensured that future Jedi would never understand the true nature of the dark side. This created a cycle of internal conflict in future generations of Jedi, who were forced to repress their emotions in ways that ultimately left them vulnerable to manipulation. As future Jedi like Luke Skywalker began to face their own inner demons, they realized the limitations of the Jedi Code and the damage it had done to their emotional well-being. Luke's struggles with the dark side, his isolation and his rejection of the Jedi Order reflected the Sith Eternal's manipulation, which had deeply ingrained the idea that the dark side was something to be repressed rather than understood. By creating this internal conflict, the Sith Eternal planted the seeds of a new generation of Jedi who would ultimately have to confront the dark side within themselves. The Sith Eternal also understood that their manipulation of Jedi would eventually give rise to new Sith Lords, just as it had done throughout galactic history. By ensuring that the dark side was always present in the galaxy, they ensured that future generations of Sith would continue to rise, even after Palpatine's death. Kylo Ren, for example, was a perfect example of the Sith Eternal's influence on the next generation of dark side users. Kylo Ren's fall to the dark side was not just a result of his own emotional instability. It was the culmination of a series of subtle manipulations by the Sith Eternal that shaped his destiny. By targeting Kylo Ren's emotions and seeking out his weaknesses, the Sith Eternal ensured that his journey would serve their ultimate goal, the rebirth of the Sith. Kylo Ren's psychological journey was shaped by emotional manipulation from both the light side and the dark side, but the Sith Eternal's influence was perhaps the most profound. They understood that dark side power did not come from selfishness or destruction, but from embracing one's emotions and channeling them for a higher purpose. The Sith Eternal knew that Kylo Ren's internal conflict was the key to unlocking his true potential as a Sith Lord, and they worked subtly to fuel his rage, doubt, and fear, the very emotions that would ultimately lead him to embrace the dark side fully. Meanwhile, Rey, who was trained as a Jedi, represented the other side of the Sith Eternal's grand design, her ancestry. The revelation that she was Palpatine's granddaughter was a key part of the Sith Eternal's influence on the next generation. By revealing Rey's bloodline, the Sith Eternal created an internal conflict within her. Could she resist the dark side and claim her own destiny, or would she embrace her Sith heritage and use the dark side to achieve ultimate power? This conflict was not just psychological, but a philosophical struggle that the Sith Eternal had carefully orchestrated. They wanted to test the next generation of Force users to see if they could embrace balance, light, and dark, just as they had done with Kylo Ren. While Rey ultimately chose to reject the dark side, her internal conflict with her dark side heritage was part of the Sith Eternal's design. They wanted to see if the light side could truly resist the dark, and if Rey could find a way to balance the two sides of her legacy. In many ways, Rey's final victory over Palpatine was not just about defeating a Sith Lord, but about defeating the idea that the dark side could ever be completely eradicated. Her victory ensured that the Sith Eternal's legacy would live on, because balance would always require the presence of both light and dark. The Sith Eternal's influence on galactic leaders and Force-sensitive individuals extended far beyond just Jedi and Sith. Their subtle manipulation created a galaxy where the Force itself was constantly in flux, perpetuating a cycle that could never truly be broken. The Jedi were forever shackled by their fear of the dark side, while the Sith were always on the edge of destruction. But the Sith Eternal's ultimate power lay in their ability to ensure that neither side could ever achieve complete dominance. The Sith Eternal's influence was not just a matter of galactic politics, warfare, or the manipulation of Force-sensitive individuals. Their true power lay in their ability to shape culture, ensuring that their dark side philosophy would be absorbed into the galaxy's collective consciousness. The Sith Eternal understood that real power came from subtly altering beliefs, values, and ideologies. In other words, creating a cultural foundation where their philosophy could thrive, even if it was never overtly acknowledged. At the core of the Sith Eternal's influence on galactic society was the manipulation of the narrative surrounding the Force. The Jedi Order, with their strict adherence to the light side, had long propagated the idea that the dark side was evil, something that needed to be suppressed and eradicated. The Sith Eternal understood that by creating a cultural dichotomy between the light and dark sides, they were ensuring that future generations would always be in a state of moral conflict, one in which good and evil were not just about right and wrong, but about psychological and emotional forces that shaped people's understanding of themselves and the universe. By embedding the idea of moral absolutism into Jedi teachings and cultural narratives, the Sith Eternal ensured that the dark side would always have a place in the galaxy's future. They made it so that the dark side's influence would always be felt, even by those who rejected it. The Jedi's fear and repression of the dark side created an inherent weakness in their philosophy, one that the Sith Eternal could exploit. They knew that repression only leads to suppression, and when emotions like anger, fear, and sadness were suppressed, they would bubble up and manifest in dangerous, unpredictable ways. The Sith Eternal subtly manipulated the Jedi's perception of emotion and passion, ensuring that Jedi were always on the defensive, never able to truly accept their emotions as part of the Force. Meanwhile, the Sith Eternal's dark philosophy was seen as powerful, liberating, and empowering for those who could embrace it. They ensured that emotion was seen not as a weakness, but as a strength, one that could be channeled for greater control and dominion over the galaxy. While the Jedi focused on controlling emotion, the Sith Eternal taught that emotion was meant to be embraced, cultivated, and directed to achieve greater goals. The Sith Eternal's influence was not only found in the Jedi-Sith conflict, but in everyday life. They knew that for their philosophy to endure, it had to be woven into the very fabric of galactic culture. From media portrayals of the Jedi as noble peacekeepers and the Sith as terrorists to the way leaders and populations viewed morality and justice, the Sith Eternal were shaping the galaxy's collective psyche. They worked to ensure that the Jedi's ideals of peace and balance were seen as unrealistic, naive, and ultimately unsustainable. In contrast, the Sith Eternal ensured that their dark side philosophy would always have a place in galactic governance, from the rise of authoritarian regimes like the Empire and the First Order to the militaristic dominance that would follow. Their cultural manipulation extended to art, literature, and education, where the Sith Eternal ensured that their version of history was taught in subtle ways, shaping the galactic population's understanding of the Force. Through art and mythology, the dark side was not depicted as inherently evil, but as powerful and inevitable. The Sith Eternal created an environment where struggle, chaos, and conflict were seen as natural, necessary parts of life, something to be embraced and harnessed rather than feared. The Jedi's suppression of the dark side was framed as a dangerous and unsustainable approach to life, one that failed to account for the natural tension between light and dark that defined the galaxy's cosmic balance. This manipulation of culture had long-lasting effects on the next generations of Force-sensitive beings. Whether in the First Order, Resistance, or the Jedi, the Sith Eternal's philosophy was constantly at work, shaping how the galaxy's leaders approached their understanding of the Force. Even after Palpatine's death, the First Order was not just a military regime, it was a continuation of the Sith Eternal's ideas, where power was seen as something to be grasped and held through passion, fear, and control. Kylo Ren, for instance, was not simply the heir to Palpatine's legacy, but to the Sith Eternal's grander vision for eternal conflict. His struggle between the light and dark side reflected the Sith Eternal's attempt to create a galaxy in perpetual flux, where peace was impossible because the dark side was always there to challenge it. Rey, too, represented the Sith Eternal's influence, albeit in a different form. As the granddaughter of Palpatine, her journey was steeped in internal conflict, a conflict that was psychologically tied to her Sith heritage. The Sith Eternal ensured that Rey's inner struggle would not just be about choosing between light and dark, but about reconciling the two, just as the Sith Eternal had hoped for generations. By embracing her heritage, Rey would not just destroy the Sith, but understand the necessity of balance between both sides of the Force. The Sith Eternal's influence ensured that the galaxy would never be free from chaos. Even in the absence of an overt Sith Empire, their philosophy was embedded in society, from the Jedi's ideals of peace to the authoritarian regimes of the First Order. This cultural and philosophical manipulation ensured that the dark side's influence would always have a place in the galaxy, ensuring the perpetual struggle between light and dark would never end. The Sith Eternal's plan for the galaxy was eternal, and even though they remained largely in the shadows, their manipulation of cultural perceptions ensured that their dark legacy would always find new generations to carry it forward. The Sith Eternal's ultimate ambition was to do more than just control the galaxy. They sought to reshape the very fabric of cosmic balance, altering the way that the Force operated throughout the galaxy. Their influence wasn't limited to just a single generation or even a single empire. Rather, they were planting the seeds for a galactic evolution that would ensure their dark side legacy would echo through centuries and millennia. They understood that true power was not about ruling the galaxy through direct force alone. It was about controlling the very flow of the force itself, ensuring that the Sith's philosophy would never fade into obscurity and that the dark side would always have its place in the grand cosmic cycle. To do this, the Sith Eternal employed ancient Sith rituals, dark side techniques, and manipulative philosophies that sought to bend the force to their will. They did not simply want to establish a single galactic empire. They wanted to reshape the galaxy's future, ensuring that the cosmic balance would always be tilted toward the dark side, maintaining a perpetual tension between the light and dark sides of the Force. The Sith Eternal believed that such balance was necessary for the galaxy's growth, evolution, and progression. Peace and stability were seen as stagnation, a dangerous lull in the cosmic flow of energy. Thus, they worked relentlessly to ensure that no era of peace could ever last, because without the dark side's influence, the galaxy would be bound to decay and complacency. At the heart of this manipulation was the galactic understanding of the Force itself. The Sith Eternal had long understood that the Force was not merely a tool to be used, but a cosmic entity, alive and ever-changing. By controlling the dark side, they believed they could manipulate the Force's balance, ensuring that it would always be in a state of flux, never static, never complete. Palpatine's resurrection, the rise of the First Order, and the return of Kylo Ren were all part of this cosmic strategy. The dark side would never truly be extinguished, and it would always return in new forms, whether in the form of new Sith Lords, like Kylo Ren, or through the continuation of Sith ideology in the galaxy's governance, militaries, and social systems. The galactic cycles of light and dark were themselves a part of the Sith Eternal's grand design. They believed that true growth came not from peaceful resolution but from the chaos and tension of eternal struggle. This cosmic tension would push the galaxy forward, ensuring that it would never stagnate but would always be in a state of change and evolution. In a universe where the dark side was always present, where the Jedi Order was forced to confront the shadows, and where the Sith always rose again to challenge the light, the galaxy would continue to evolve toward a more complex and diverse future. The Sith Eternal's influence ensured that this future would never be predictable. It would always be shaped by the struggle between the light and dark sides of the Force. The Sith Eternal's plan was not one of immediate conquest, but of long-term cosmic manipulation. They understood that the Force was the key to controlling the galaxy, and that as long as the dark side remained a part of the galactic equilibrium, they would always have a hand in shaping events. Through their ancient rituals, they created a feedback loop in the galaxy's history, where the dark side would always return to counterbalance the light. The rise of Sith Lords would always be inevitable, as the galaxy's need for conflict would always pull new generations toward the dark side. This created a cosmic pattern of unending cycles, a perpetual state of conflict that would continue to shape the galaxy's future. The Sith Eternal's manipulation of time was perhaps their most profound cosmic strategy. By influencing not just the current generation but also the future, they ensured that their dark side philosophy would never fade away. Through the use of dark side sorcery and ancient Sith techniques, they ensured that the dark side would always have a lasting presence in the galaxy. The Force itself could be shaped and molded to serve their ultimate vision. This manipulation extended beyond the physical realm, influencing the very nature of time, space, and destiny itself. The Sith Eternal's rituals ensured that their dark legacy would echo not just in the present, but in all future timelines, a legacy that could never be erased or undone. Even after the apparent defeat of Palpatine and the fall of the Empire, the Sith Eternal's cosmic influence continued to affect the galaxy's timeline. Their efforts to embed the dark side into the galaxy's future ensured that no matter how many heroes rose, how many wars were fought, or how many galactic orders were established, the dark side would always return when the galaxy needed it most. The Sith Eternal's plan to manipulate the cosmic balance would ensure that their legacy was not just about the immediate future, but about creating a timeless cycle of conflict and struggle that would shape the galaxy's destiny for all eternity. At the core of the Sith Eternal's plan was their understanding of emotion, specifically how emotions like fear, anger, sadness, and desire could be harnessed and manipulated to influence the decisions and fates of the galaxy's inhabitants. The Sith Eternal recognized that emotion, when uncontrolled, could lead individuals to embrace the dark side of the Force. However, they also knew that emotions could be used in a much more subtle way, as a means to create a psychological battleground within individuals, pushing them toward decisions that serve the Sith Eternal's long-term goals. One of the most significant ways the Sith Eternal wielded their influence was through the subtle manipulation of internal emotional conflicts in key figures, especially those sensitive to the Force. The Sith Eternal understood that the dark side was not something that could be simply eradicated. It existed in every individual as part of the Force's duality. The Jedi, by their very nature, suppressed the dark side, and this suppression created internal friction that left them vulnerable to the dark side's pull. The Sith Eternal planted the seeds of doubt in the minds of the Jedi, ensuring that their repression of emotion would eventually lead them to fail. In contrast, the Sith Eternal used emotion as a tool to manipulate the future Sith Lords and dark side users, guiding them toward their destiny. Kylo Ren's internal struggle was the perfect example of how the Sith Eternal manipulated emotional and spiritual conflicts to shape the galaxy's future. From a young age, Ben Solo was torn between the light side, with its demands for self-discipline and detachment, and the dark side, which offered him a path of passion, power, and freedom. His family background was also a factor. The legacy of his grandfather, Darth Vader, and his parents' connection to the light made his internal battle even more pronounced. The Sith Eternal subtly manipulated these emotions, creating a psychological environment where Kylo Ren would continually struggle with his desire for power, his inherent attachment to his family, and the legacy of the Sith. By manipulating these personal struggles, the Sith Eternal ensured that Kylo Ren would never be able to completely embrace the light side, and that he would inevitably fall deeper into the dark side. The Sith Eternal's influence also manifested in the way they manipulated the emotional growth of Rey. While she did not start as a Sith or a dark side user, Rey's emotional vulnerability and attachment to her family were key areas of manipulation. The revelation of her lineage, that she was the granddaughter of Palpatine, was not just a plot device, but a psychological maneuver orchestrated by the Sith Eternal. By revealing Rey's ancestry, the Sith Eternal sought to make her question her identity and purpose. The dark side, embodied by her grandfather, was always calling to her, urging her to embrace the Sith path. The Sith Eternal knew that Rey's struggle with her emotions, her desire to find a family, her attachment to her friends, and her growing connection to the Force would leave her vulnerable to temptation. By deepening Rey's internal conflict, the Sith Eternal ensured that her final battle against Palpatine would not be about simply defeating a Sith Lord. Instead, it would be about overcoming her emotional inheritance and choosing to reject the dark side. The Sith Eternal's influence was evident in Rey's struggle, her desire to be more than her bloodline, to prove her worth and to embrace the light, despite the temptation of her ancestral connection to the dark side. Even though Rey ultimately rejected the dark side, the Sith Eternal's manipulation was part of her journey. They had placed the idea of balance, the coexistence of light and dark, at the heart of her internal struggle. Even her final victory over Palpatine was a reflection of the cosmic balance that the Sith Eternal had long sought to create. A galaxy in which the light could never be pure without the dark as its counterpart. The Sith Eternal's mastery of emotional manipulation was not limited to Rey and Kylo Ren alone. It extended to the broader galaxy, where ordinary citizens, leaders, and even the Force-sensitive were subtly affected by the dark side's influence. The galaxy's history was shaped by emotion, whether it was the fear that drove Palpatine's rise to power, the anger that fueled the Rebel Alliance, or the doubt that plagued the Jedi Order. The Sith Eternal understood that emotion was the key to manipulating fate, and they worked tirelessly to create a galactic atmosphere where tension, conflict, and struggle were inevitable. By sowing discord among the Jedi, the rebels, and even the common citizens of the galaxy, the Sith Eternal ensured that no one was ever truly at peace. Their emotional manipulation ensured that the galaxy's future would always be in a state of unrest, where the light would never have the freedom to triumph without being pulled back into conflict by the dark side. The Sith Eternal were the architects of this emotional struggle, understanding that the cosmic balance of the Force would always remain in flux as long as the dark side continued to feed on the galaxy's unresolved conflicts. One of the most profound aspects of the Sith Eternal's strategy was their ability to operate in complete secrecy while still maintaining a profound influence over galactic events. After the fall of the Empire and Palpatine's death, many believed that the Sith had been utterly eradicated from the galaxy. The Jedi, in particular, assumed that their Order's victory marked the end of Sith domination. However, the Sith Eternal had been planning for this exact eventuality. They had built an empire in the shadows, an invisible network that worked quietly behind the scenes to rebuild the Sith in ways that were beyond the detection of both the Jedi and the New Republic. At the heart of their covert operations was the hidden world of Exegol, a place where the Sith Eternal carried out their most ancient rituals, where the dark side could grow unchecked, and where they could bide their time until the galaxy's balance once again tilted in their favor. Exegol was not simply a fortress or stronghold, it was the epicenter of their long-term vision, a place where the Sith Eternal could remain hidden while continuing to manipulate galactic politics, social systems, and Force-sensitive individuals from afar. The hidden fleet on Exegol, with its massive armada of star destroyers, was not intended to be a tool for immediate conquest, but rather a symbol of their hidden power, an ace in the hole that could be revealed at the right moment. The Sith Eternal knew that the true battle for control of the galaxy would not come from overt military conflict, but from the long-term battle for influence. Their strategy was to embed themselves deeply within the galactic structures, from the military to the corporate sectors, from the galactic senate to the minds of future leaders. They understood that power was not just about controlling territory, but about shaping perceptions and creating conflict in the minds of key figures. They used psychological manipulation and subtle influence to create a galaxy in perpetual flux, where light and dark would always be at odds, and where the dark side would rise to meet the challenges of the galaxy whenever it was needed. One of the Sith Eternal's greatest triumphs was their ability to remain unseen by both the Jedi and the Rebel Alliance. They were able to maintain their hidden network by operating in secret, behind layers of deception and misdirection. while the New Republic and Jedi Order focused their efforts on rebuilding and ensuring a new era of peace. The Sith Eternal continued to work quietly, laying the groundwork for the next Sith Lord to rise. The rise of Kylo Ren and the eventual resurrection of Palpatine were not accidents. They were the culmination of decades of careful planning in which the Sith Eternal played a hidden hand in shaping the future. The secrecy of the Sith Eternal allowed them to remain free from scrutiny by the galaxy's major powers. They used their seclusion to form secret alliances with powerful entities, such as the Trade Federation, and their dark influence even stretched into the underworld, where groups like the Hutt cartel were secretly manipulated to further their own ends. The Sith Eternal were able to create fractures in the galaxy's leadership by manipulating political rivalries and social tensions, ensuring that no one could effectively oppose them while they quietly worked toward their goals. Kylo Ren and Rey, both central figures in the galaxy's future, and the Jedi-Sith conflict, were shaped not just by their individual choices, but by the secret influence of the Sith Eternal. Kylo Ren's path toward the dark side was influenced by their subtle manipulations, guiding him toward embracing his family's dark legacy and accepting the Sith philosophy as the ultimate form of power. Meanwhile, Rey's internal struggle, her battle to understand her heritage and choose between light and dark, was orchestrated by the Sith Eternal's control over her family lineage. Her ancestry, as Palpatine's granddaughter, ensured that she would always have a psychological tie to the dark side, one that she could not easily escape. This was all part of the Sith Eternal's plan to manipulate the next generation of Force-sensitive individuals and galactic leaders, ensuring that the dark side would always have a place in the galaxy's future, no matter how hard the Jedi or the New Republic tried to suppress it. In their secrecy, the Sith Eternal created an environment where the dark side could grow undetected, feeding on the galactic instability and emotional turmoil that was always present in the galaxy. They did not need to dominate the galaxy outright. They knew that by remaining hidden, they could manipulate key events from the shadows and weaken their enemies by instilling fear, doubt, and chaos within the galaxy's leadership. The First Order was merely the first manifestation of their hidden empire, but it was never meant to be the final stage of their plan. The dark side would always find a way to rise again from the ashes, and the Sith Eternal would continue to guide it from behind the veil of secrecy. In conclusion, the Sith Eternal's legacy is one of subtle yet profound influence over the galaxy, shaping the course of its history, philosophical evolution, and future conflicts. Their true genius lay not in their open domination, but in their ability to manipulate from the shadows, ensuring that the dark side would never be eradicated, but instead would be woven into the fabric of galactic society, culture, and governance. Through psychological manipulation, secrecy, and the careful training of future Sith Lords and Force-sensitive individuals, the Sith Eternal ensured that their vision for an eternal balance of light and dark would persist for generations. From their hidden strongholds to the internal struggles of key individuals like Kylo Ren and Rey, the Sith Eternal's influence was felt in every corner of the galaxy. They planted the seeds of conflict, chaos, and struggle, knowing that such forces were essential for the galaxy's growth and evolution. Whether through cultural manipulation, the sowing of discord among the Jedi and Sith, or the perpetuation of emotional and spiritual conflict, the Sith Eternals shaped not just the events of their time, but the future destiny of the galaxy itself. Their cosmic vision, built on the inherent tension between the light and the dark, ensured that the galaxy would never be truly at peace, and that the dark side would always have a place in the galaxy's future. Through their careful design, The Sith Eternal created a universe in which chaos and order would forever clash, and the dark side would never fade, leaving an indelible mark on the galaxy's history. In the end, the Sith Eternal's power was not in their ability to rule, but in their ability to influence and shape the very soul of the galaxy. Even in defeat, their legacy would continue to echo through the Force, creating a galaxy that was forever defined by their dark philosophy, where the light would never be free from the struggle of the asterisk.